Yeah, so I got the impression I ripped you off yesterday. I didn't show you enough slides, so I'm going to take this opportunity to blast you with a few more slides. So 9 years ago, I was called to serve on a couple of National Academy of Sciences panels in the U.S. related to, well, the first one was related to tritium and its impacts on the environment. They discovered a bunch of leaks around commercial power plants, and and some were leaking off the site and in a big way, and nobody seemed to know what the potential environmental impacts were. Everybody thought they'd probably be minimal, but empirically, in terms of data testing, whether or not there would be any consequences, nobody really had any answers. At that time, someone got up, really prominent epidemiologist got up and said, well, you know, I've been watching TV, and they have all these shows about Chernobyl, and the wildlife's thriving, so it couldn't be that big a problem. So that was the first light that went off in my brain about having to communicate science findings. But the second panel that came the following year was related to the fact that there was this renewed interest in whether or not cancer rates around nuclear facilities were higher than in background areas. There had been some renewed interest in the KKK study out of Europe and childhood leukemia rates, and there had been a study 20 years earlier, but it had been in the U.S., but it had been done at such a coarse scale that it would have been impossible to see 2, 3 tripling effects if there had been any, just because of the scale of analysis. And so this panel was set up to devise, well, first to assess whether or not it was even worth asking the question, and secondly, whether there was any way to devise any kind of rigorous scientific study to address that particular question. Are cancer rates elevated around nuclear power plants? Given the U.S. has, over 100 reactors going, it seemed like a good place to do it, and so we spent a few years devising what would be necessary for a pilot study, and then they had a second version of the panel that actually determined that, assess the parameters for a true pilot study, what would be needed. Came out that it was going to cost $7 million plus or minus, plus 2, 3, 4 years to do, and the NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, then decided that, it's too expensive and it's going to take too long. And besides that, we'd never find anything anyway. so they pulled the rug out from under that one. But while I was involved in that, I started thinking about, from my perspective, I'm not interested in cancer per se, but in terms of environmental consequences, what would be necessary to actually get at this question of, are there environmental impacts related to the radiation releases? And it occurred to me, so the light went off in my brain, South Carolina is one of the most nuclearized places on the planet in terms of commercial energy, nuclear energy production. I live right here.
Oh. And
these are five different reactor sites within an hour's drive of where I
live right there.
and that doesn't include the low-level waste storage, it's made out of Riverside, the Westinghouse fuel fabrication. It's a very nuclearized part of the world. And so it occurred to me that we just need to set up some monitoring. Nobody's done any kind of really fine-scale monitoring in these sites. And what better place to do it than South Carolina? And that sort of dwelled in my mind for a couple of years. And then a really smart undergraduate came to visit me. He was a double major. His first major was biology. Second major was performance, pipe organ performance, music. Interesting fellow. Strange combination. He was very busy on Sundays, and but the rest of the week he could do biology. And so he came to me and he said, I really want to get involved in this kind of study, and what could we possibly do? And so it dawned on me, I've been making all of these TLD dosimeters for my birds, making little miniature dosimeters to put on rings of birds so that we could track how much of a dose they were getting. We've been injecting them inside mice. We've been putting them everywhere to see what the actual doses were. And other people have been thinking along the same lines for quite some time. But I decided we can use these in the environment. We can go put these little TLDs around all these nuclear power plants, you know, they're really cheap. They're not so great in terms of real-time monitoring. You have to wait for them to accumulate enough dose to be useful, but or measurable. But so anyway, this student, you know, free labor. I teamed him up with my oldest son, who's an avid fisherman and had a boat, and so they traipsed around the state, sticking up TLDs, several hundred of these TLDs, and then turning them over on a 3 to 4 month basis to monitor what the emissions were from these power plants. Could we see any signal of elevated gamma radiation around these power plants? And so a year and a half later, and oh yeah, this is sort of what it looks like. Some photos of the construction site 20 miles north of my house. This is where they were in the process of building the 2 new Westinghouse AP1000s. Westinghouse went bankrupt. The utility company decided that $9 billion into the project that they weren't going to have the resources to finish it, so they cut this off midstream last year. But the one in Georgia, again, looks a little different because it uses cooling towers, but it's the same idea. The one in Georgia has been going strong, so we'll see. I'm not so pessimistic that it won't be finished given the renewed interest in nuclear energy in the U.S. We'll see. Anyway, we've got TLDs all around these new sites and old sites, and, you know, using GIS and other fancy statistical methods, we can look at the distance between the reactors, and more importantly, for this kind of study, we have meteorological data, and that was really one of the issues. Is it just distance? No, of course not. It has to be. You have to weight the distance by the dominant prevailing winds, for instance. That's the hypothesis, at least. And so the student took all of the dose data that was generated by these TLDs, and then the meteorological data, and then generated synthetic proxies for expected dose given this kind of model. And this is the simple summary finding. Oh, can you turn off that? Sorry. Yeah. This is not. This isn't published yet. So, is that camera running? The back one running?
Yeah.
We should probably turn that off. But the not for distribution yet. Not ready for prime time, as it were. Actually, David, I'm not sure if we should let you stay in the room, but
We want it peer-reviewed and published. It's not censorship, it's protection of intellectual property.
there is that. There is that. Now, basically, until it's published, everything's subject to change. So, don't just take this with a grain of salt. We may have completely messed up the analysis. It's possible. I don't think so, but until it's out there in published form, it's not real. But for a group like this, hey, what the heck? Sunday morning, little entertainment, little light entertainment, and so this is the simplified results from the analysis. And what it basically shows is that the daily dose measured in this case milligray, sorry, the units are wrong, but anyway, that's the predicted annual dose in milligray versus this dispersion factor, which is a composite measure of the distance from the power plant and the degree to which the winds were blowing at you across the time period of measurement. And this may look like a mess to you, but statistically it's a highly significant relationship. And what it suggests is that the further away you are and the less downwind you are, the lower the dose you get, or more appropriately. If you're close to the power plant and downwind most of the time, you're going to get approximately double the dose related to the power plant. We've done much more sophisticated analyses. It looks sort of messy like this, and basically there's an attempt to unravel the relative importance of the type of reactor that was burning, as well as whether it was in this reprocessing mode. We'd expected, based on the literature, that there would be a pulse of high radioactivity during these refueling events. What we found perhaps because of the scale at which, the temporal scale over which we measure things, was that actually during the reprocessing event at the sites where there's a single reactor, the radiation levels go way down. And I guess that's not really surprising because we sort of miss this plume perhaps, and there's no operations going on. And it's kind of sort of a control for the other measurements in that it shows that when things are operating, there's higher levels of emissions than when they're not in general.
But you're measuring only gamma.
This is only gamma, so
Okay.
we're not getting tritium out of this.
But we use reprocessing to mean that the spent fuel being taken somewhere else.
He means refueling.
Refueling. So when they open up the reactor, so every 2 years
I
or
thought
so.
you meant you mean new rods or whatever being put in, a change of fuel you're talking about.
So every 2 years, they open up the reactor and replace a third of the fuel rods with new ones. And the thought is, the belief is, and the industry believes this too, because they've really worked hard to increase the length of the interval time between refueling and to shorten the time that the reactors actually open because of these kinds of concerns. But the thought is that there is this major pulse of emissions that may be important for epidemiological reasons. Ian Farrelly, for instance, has been really pushing the notion, the hypothesis that it's these refueling events that give this pulse of high dose that may be responsible for the childhood leukemia. This is just another graph showing similar sorts of patterns in that, again, during refueling events, we see a major drop-off in these doses for the reactors with for the power plants with a single reactor. So anyway, again, this is all kind of hush-hush until it gets published. I'm collaborating with somebody at Emory University to do redo the statistical analysis. We've had some consultants from the NRPA, the Norwegian Radiation Protection Authority, who specialize in dispersion, atmospheric dispersion modeling, to have a look at some of this. And undoubtedly there's much more sophisticated and comprehensive ways to do this kind of analysis. It's just kind of interesting that it's not, as best I can tell, not really been done in this way, at least, in any kind of repeated comprehensive way. Questions?
So is
I
there
want
any,
to tag one slide on, and that's all I
yes,
have.
go on.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Is
the,
there
yeah,
any evidence of, is the KI case that, as you said, found double the rate of childhood leukemia in children under 5 miles from the plants?
5
Is there
kilometers,
any,
yeah.
Is there any correlation to cancer clusters or leukemias or?
So that would be a far more difficult second or third or fourth step.
Okay.
We were doing it actually just to see if we could actually put spots on the map where we would predict to be hotter
Yeah.
than others, so that we could go collect butterflies and see what they're doing.
But you haven't done that yet. You haven't done any animals round then.
It's there's only.
This is one
24 hours a
undergraduate.
day. There's only 24 hours a day.
Yeah, well, we know what
I'm not being
undergraduates do in
rude.
this country.
I keep waiting for Bill Gates to send me a check.